There's no going back now. Hey guys, in this video we're going to revisit the motorcycle mirrors in the Prius. In a previous video I installed motorcycle mirrors in my second generation Prius to improve the fuel economy. Or at least I hoped it would improve fuel economy. The idea was to use smaller side mirrors to reduce aerodynamic drag. I also did some rather crude aerodynamic testing, which actually turned out to be inconclusive. But the fuel economy data seemed to suggest a small improvement. So at this point you may be wondering why I decided to revisit the side mirrors. That's a fair question. And there are three main reasons. First of all, these mirrors are not very aesthetically pleasing. In other words, they're ugly. Also, they make a lot of wind noise, which seems to suggest they may not be as aerodynamic as I originally thought. And last but not least, they stick up really high, which actually blocks some of my view when I'm making a turn. So the idea is to replace them with something that is more aerodynamic and more visually appealing and of course doesn't block my view. After some research, I found some sport bike mirrors that might work. They fit all the criteria. They look nice, they appear to be more aerodynamic, and they won't stick up like a pair of giant eye stalks. Okay, so far so good, but there's a catch. These new mirrors need to be installed in the same spot as the original ones, which means the mounting bases for the original mirrors need to be removed. That's going to leave some holes in the mirror bases, and of course those holes will need to be filled. But I've got fiberglass, and I know how to use it, so I think we're good. Anyway, I decided to cut the mirror bases with the reciprocating saw because I think it'll look good on camera. But I don't want to damage my car in the process, so I turned the saw upside down and cut upwards. By the way, these mirrors are pretty easy to remove and replace. Just pop the tweeter loose from the door and the mounting bolts are right there. There are 3 10mm nuts. Also, be careful when you remove those nuts. If you drop them down into the door, your life is going to get a lot more difficult. Thankfully, I kept my original side mirrors. I reinstalled them so I can drive the car while I work on the custom mirrors. Speaking of the custom mirrors, that chop saw made a pretty rough cut, so we need to grind it smooth. I used a bench grinder and an orbital sander for that, but I'm sure there are plenty of other tools that'll get the job done. And here's what the mirror bases look like after some sanding. Now you can clearly see the holes that need to be filled. We're going to fill those holes with fiberglass. I'm going to use a two-step process. First of all, I'm going to tape over the holes with masking tape. Then I'm going to mix up some fiberglass goop and fill all those holes from the back side. After that dries, I'm going to turn it over and put a layer of fiberglass on the front side. Here I'm making the fiberglass goop. I mixed some resin, then added glass powder until it was roughly the consistency of thick ketchup. Then I used a disposable brush to apply it. Also notice I'm using rubber gloves because fiberglass resin is nasty stuff. I don't want to get that on my skin. Okay, looks good. We're going to let this cure overnight and come back tomorrow. The resin is fully cured, so now we can remove the tape. The resin doesn't bond to the tape, so the tape comes off pretty easy. And you can see the fiberglass filled up all those holes. But I want to take it one step further. I'm also going to apply some fiberglass to the front side for more structural strength. And for this step, I'm going to use glass fiber cloth. So here I'm using the mirror bases to trace out the pieces to cut from the glass cloth. I'm going to use 2 layers of glass cloth on each mirror base for a total of 4 pieces. Alright folks, it's fiberglass time. Once again, I'm wearing rubber gloves because fiberglass resin is nasty stuff. and I'm using another disposable brush to apply it. You may be wondering why I'm using disposable brushes, and that's because trying to clean fiberglass resin out of a paintbrush is pretty pointless. You're better off getting cheap disposable brushes and toss them in the trash when you're done. Also, off camera, I made some extra pieces of glass cloth. I like to have some extra scraps on hand just in case. Plus, I decided to add an extra layer across all those holes. Once again, the resin needs to harden overnight, so we're going to do another jump cut. Okay, it's the next day and the fiberglass is fully cured. So now we get to start the finish work. The raw fiberglass has a rough texture which needs to be smoothed out. Plus, it needs a coat of paint to make it look nice. Before we continue, here's a word of warning. The raw fiberglass is going to have a bunch of sharp pointy bits all around the edge. These things are like 1,000 hypodermic needles, just waiting to collect a blood sample. Not only can they poke you, but it's also possible for one of them to break off inside your skin, and then you might get a cool scar like this one on my finger. I'm joking, this is not cool. Anyway, fiberglass work involves a lot of sanding. I'm not going to make you watch all of it, that would be sadistic. But according to my experience, only about 10% of fiberglass work is actually making the fiberglass. The other 90% is prep work and finish work, and most of that 90% involves sanding. I also want to point out that I'm using a dust mask, and there's a fan behind me blowing the dust away from my face, because fiberglass dust is not good for your health. Alright, the first round of sanding is done. So now I'm going to apply a layer of body filler to smooth things out. It'll fill in any pinholes or uneven spots in the fiberglass. And as you can see, I'm wearing rubber gloves again. I don't want to get this stuff on my skin. But if you've ever had Bondo dingleberries sticking to the hair on your hands, you'll understand why. For some reason I couldn't find my putty spreaders, so I decided to use an old credit card. It'll be good enough. Now the Bondo putty does not have to dry overnight. It only needs about 15 to 20 minutes. So I let it harden and we get to do more sanding. I did the rough sanding with the orbital sander, then switched to a manually operated mouse sander for the fine sanding. I did most of this off camera because it took several applications to get everything smoothed out. That's actually pretty normal. After you sand the Bondo smooth, you might see a few spots that need more filler, so you'll add some more Bondo there, then you'll sand it smooth, and check it again, lather, rinse, repeat. Eventually, you'll get to a point where you think it's ready for paint. Then you'll put on a coat of primer and notice some more imperfections. And then you'll sand it again, and you get the point. After I was satisfied with the finish, I decided to drill the mounting holes for the mirrors. I did this before the final paint because I didn't want to risk damaging the paint. Speaking of which, I decided to use semi-gloss black. I sprayed on 3 light coats, then followed up with 3 coats of clear satin. In retrospect, I probably should have used clear semi-gloss. The satin is a little too dull for my taste. Oh well, that's not a big deal. I let the paint dry overnight, then I bolted on the new mirrors. I was so eager to get the new mirrors installed, I forgot to turn on the video camera. Also, check out the size difference between the sport bike mirrors and the stock ones. That's pretty crazy. Installing the new mirrors was pretty easy. Just pop the tweeters loose from the doors to access the mounting hardware. Last but not least, let's take a look at the car with its new mirrors installed. I think they look much better. At least my car doesn't look like it has antlers anymore. Anyway, that's it for this video. See you next time.